a year, just trying to get some money.
Who's trying to get some money?
She is.
How do you know that?
Because she sued me for $24 million.
Did you sue her?
No.
Could you have sued her?
Objection.
The glitz of Beverly Hills turned into a battlefield when Cardi B was dragged into a $24 million lawsuit by ex-security guard Ammani Ellis. What started as whispers exploded into a cultural war, accusations of spit, slurs, and scars colliding. With a superstar's fight for her legacy, with witnesses flipping the story on its head and the world watching every move, this wasn't just a trial, it was a showdown that threatened to end careers and rewrite reputations forever. The streets of Beverly Hills had always been familiar with flashing cameras, scandal-chasing paparazzi, and whispered rumors that spread faster than perfume in the air, but never before had this glittering city been forced to hold its breath the way it did when the name Cardi B collided head-on with the accusations of former security guard Ammani Ellis. This wasn't just another lawsuit. It was an earthquake wrapped in dollar signs, bruised egos, and allegations so sharp they threatened to cut straight through reputations built over years. When the papers were filed on August 25, 2025, they were more than ink and signatures, they were weapons, opening shots in a battle instantly fed to the masses, chewed by bloggers, dissected by YouTubers, and flung into trending infernos across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. At the center of it all was a demand so outrageous it froze people mid-scroll. $24 million. Ammani Ellis wasn't rolled out to the public as another clout-chasing socialite trying to attach herself to a famous name. No, she was painted as ordinary, an everyday woman, a former security guard who stood outside office doors and managed hallways, not red carpets. Her claim was simple but explosive: a Grammy-winning superstar had spat on her, screamed racial slurs, and dragged a nail across her face with such force that plastic surgery was required to fix the damage. What to her felt like humiliation and trauma in a sterile hallway in Beverly Hills back in 2018 was now being inflated into a trial capable of shaking pop culture itself. When those claims hit the internet, battle lines were drawn instantly. Half of the digital world swore this was a greedy cash grab meant to take down a successful black woman at the height of her power, while the other half screamed that accountability must come regardless of fame, and that money should never be a shield against consequences. Day one of the trial felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the premiere of a new season of America's favorite twisted show, the marriage of celebrity culture and justice. The courthouse was swarmed with cameras, the sidewalks thick with bloggers broadcasting live streams, the air filled with reporters shouting questions no one would dare answer. Paparazzi jostled with interns carrying court files, flashes popped like fireworks, and fans gathered as if this were an album release instead of sworn testimony. Inside, silence struck like a gavel when Ammani Ellis stepped up to the witness stand. No longer just a name in a headline, she became a trembling voice filling the air with accusations that dripped heavier with every word. She swore Cardi B spat on her. She swore she was called names that scorched her dignity. She swore a nail cut her face so deeply she had been left scarred, surgically altered, and emotionally bruised forever. The jury shifted uncomfortably, scribbling notes as gasps echoed through the gallery when Ammani described her surgery, but what unfolded wasn't simply testimony, it was a narrative war. Ammani's legal team painted her as a vulnerable worker, crushed beneath the machinery of celebrity power, a woman whose ordinary life had been trampled by a superstar who thought fame meant immunity. They framed Cardi as someone who used her influence to intimidate, her reach to silence, and her wealth to walk away clean. They weren't just asking for lost wages or compensation for physical pain, they were demanding dignity repaid in dollar bills. $24 million, they argued, wasn't a request. It was justice wearing a price tag. Outside, the internet lost its collective mind. Hashtags dueled for dominance. Hashtag Justice for Ammani surged on one side, championing her bravery for daring to go toe-to-toe with a global icon. On the other side, hashtag Protect Cardi blazed with equal fury, casting Ammani as an opportunist who had weaponized tears for clout. Memes exploded. Some mocked the lawsuit, others painted Cardi as a monster, and by sundown, the digital world had already tried and convicted both women in two separate courts, one bound by law, the other by opinion. Inside, the tension was a rope stretched so tight it threatened to snap. The defense table remained a fortress of silence. Cardi B didn't twitch, didn't smirk, didn't let a flicker of expression betray her thoughts as her lawyers whispered strategies under their breath. She knew that in this game, the cameras were always rolling. Any eye roll, any sigh, any subtle shake of the head could be captured, clipped, and spun into guilt. Her stoic composure became a statement of its own, that she wasn't here to play into narratives. But silence can be a weapon just as sharp as words, and Ammani's trembling voice filled the void, carving imagery of spit, slurs, and scars into the jury's imagination. When the judge's gavel finally cracked to close day one, the courtroom exhaled, but outside, the fire raged higher. Commentators descended like vultures, each with their own spin. One pundit declared, "If this is true, it could end her career." Another fired back, "If this is false, it's the scam of the decade." The contradictions didn't cancel each other, they fed the frenzy. By midnight, the case had transcended its courtroom walls. It wasn't about two women anymore. It was about power, perception, and the way America eats stories alive. Day two arrived promising clarity, but clarity never came, only smoke, mirrors, and the kind of contradictions that keep audiences hooked. This time it was Cardi B's turn to face the jury. The room vibrated with anticipation, every journalist poised with pens and recorders, every fan outside glued to live updates. Cardi spoke with steady calm, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who knew she was standing on the cliff's edge of her legacy. She denied everything, no spitting, no scratching, no assault. "For me," she said, her tone unwavering, "it was not an incident." The phrase became her shield, repeated like armor, forcing the jury to reconsider whether the story they were hearing had been inflated into myth. She explained that what happened was not an attack, but a confrontation rooted in violation. Ammani Ellis had been filming her as she entered her doctor's office. For Cardi, then pregnant and wary of the dangers fame could bring, that was the true aggression. "I wasn't on a high level of angry," she said, "I was on a high level of concern." She framed herself not as a superstar towering over the powerless, but as a vulnerable mother-to-be cornered in a sterile hallway by a stranger holding a phone. And when pressed about the imbalance of size and power, whether Ammani was more physically imposing, Cardi didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," she said. "I felt like she was about to beat my ass." The line hit the courtroom like an earthquake, shaking the narrative foundation. Suddenly the question wasn't just about whether spit flew or nails scratched, it was about who had truly felt threatened, who was the aggressor and who was the victim. The prosecution tried to poke holes, pressing her to admit she might have lashed out. But Cardi didn't waver. Instead, she flipped the focus with one simple piece of evidence: her nails. Tested after the alleged incident, they measured less than an inch long, manicured into rounded edges that made gouging wounds impossible. It was a detail so plain it carried devastating weight. The gallery buzzed. Outside, the internet detonated again. Team Cardi posted side-by-side photos of her manicured hands, turning nail length into a trending topic. Fans argued angles, sizes, and physics, with even nail technicians weighing in as if they were forensic experts. Meanwhile, Team Ammani dismissed it as a distraction, a sleight of hand meant to pull focus from trauma. The trial began to look less like a legal proceeding and more like a live-streamed reality show, where perception mattered more than proof. The third morning of the trial didn't feel like justice, it felt like the climax of a live show where every second mattered and the entire world was holding its breath. All the chatter buzzing through blogs and social media wasn't about the lawyers or even the jury anymore. It was about one woman who hadn't yet spoken. Tiara, the receptionist. Unlike celebrities, unlike lawyers, unlike security guards with stories to protect, she had nothing to gain, no fame to chase, no fortune to secure. She was the neutral party. The one person who had stood in that hallway not as an enemy, not as a fan, not as a target, but as a witness. And because she was ordinary, because she wasn't built into the machine of celebrity culture, her words carried the most danger. If she leaned toward Ammani Ellis, the case would ignite like gasoline on a flame. If she leaned toward Cardi B, the foundation of the lawsuit could collapse. When Tiara entered the courtroom, the atmosphere snapped into silence. The shuffle of reporters' pens stopped. The photographers stopped clicking. Even the air itself seemed to tighten. She adjusted her blazer, took the oath, and looked directly at the jury with eyes that did not flinch. Then she spoke. Her first words landed like thunder. "I was there that day. I heard the commotion. I saw what was happening. And what I saw was a heated argument, not an assault." With that single line, the narrative shifted. Gasps filled the gallery. Ammani's team scrambled in their seats. Cardi's defense lawyers sat up straighter, their faces easing into something close to relief. Because in one moment, Tiara had carved through months of accusation, her testimony painted a very different picture than the one built by the plaintiff. She described shouting, yes. She described insults, yes. She described energy high enough to make the walls vibrate. But what she didn't describe was spit flying, nails clawing, or skin tearing. If there had been, she told the jury firmly, I would have seen it. And I saw nothing like that. Her words dismantled the very core of Ammani's claims, but it was her next revelation that turned the courtroom into chaos. With her voice steady and her gaze fixed, she said, months after the incident, Ammani contacted me. She asked me to support her story, to say things I didn't see. She wanted me to testify against Cardi. The gallery exploded. The judge's gavel slammed again and again, demanding silence. Reporters scribbled so fast their pens nearly tore the paper. Cardi B looked down, hiding the faintest smirk behind her hand. Ammani Ellis froze, whispering furiously to her lawyers, her face flushing red. Because now, the case wasn't just about assault, it was about manipulation. It was about whether the lawsuit itself had been crafted on exaggeration or even lies. The prosecution lunged at Tiara, trying to tear her apart. They accused her of bias. They asked whether she was distracted that day, whether she remembered clearly, whether she was blinded by Cardi's fame. She admitted she had been eager to leave for her sister's baby shower that day but said that made her pay even more attention. She wanted the drama to end quickly so she could go. She admitted Cardi was her patient, but reminded the court that patients come and go, and fame doesn't matter when you're standing in a hallway breaking up a shouting match. Fame doesn't mean a thing when you're right there in the middle of it, she said bluntly. I wasn't looking at a celebrity. I was looking at two women arguing. Social media erupted in seconds. Clips of her statements were spliced into TikToks, stitched with reactions, and captioned into memes. Her lines, "I would have seen it," and "she wanted me to lie," circulated as if they were lyrics to a viral song. Overnight, #Justice for Ammani shrank while #Tiara the Truth trended worldwide. Some fans crowned her a hero, the woman who risked everything to tell the truth. Others spun conspiracy theories, claiming she must have been paid off by Cardi's team. Was she pressured? Was she threatened? Was this loyalty or fear? The speculation only made her words more powerful than back inside. Ammani looked cornered, her once confident aura replaced with agitation. She shifted, avoided eye contact, whispered aggressively to her attorneys. For the first time since the trial began, she looked less like a victim and more like someone caught inside her own strategy. The prosecution scrambled to recover, but the defense had found their rhythm. They leaned into Tiara's credibility, hammering home the absence of physical evidence, no clear videos, no surveillance footage, no medical records presented to the jury. The case, they argued, was a tower built on shaky words now collapsing under the weight of witnesses who had no reason to lie. As the afternoon wore on, the defense lined up more testimony. Witness after witness echoed the same point, heated words, yes. Raised voices, yes. But no spitting, no scratching, no physical assault. The repetition gave their argument a rhythm, a consistency that began to sink deeper into the jury's minds. The prosecution, desperate, doubled down on emotion. They replayed Ammani's tears, painting her as a woman drowning under celebrity power. Even if no one saw every detail, they argued, doesn't trauma sometimes happen in the shadows? Doesn't intimidation make silence its own weapon? Their plea wasn't about evidence, it was about empathy. The tension reached a breaking point when Cardi B was recalled to the stand. This time, the prosecutor pressed harder, firing questions like bullets. Did you raise your hand? Did you lunge forward? Did you lose your temper? To each question, Cardi answered firmly, no. The back and forth grew sharp. Voices rising until the prosecutor sneered, so you're saying every witness is wrong, and only you are right? Without hesitation, Cardi leaned into the microphone and delivered a line that cracked through the courtroom like one of her own lyrics. I'm saying the truth is on my side. That's what I'm saying. The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Fans outside screamed her words into megaphones. It was a viral moment born in real time, but the trial wasn't finished. One last name hung heavy over the courtroom, whispered in the gallery, typed into blogs. Speculated about on Twitter, Dr. Faninki, the doctor who had been less than a foot away when the confrontation happened. Unlike Tiara, he wasn't a receptionist. Unlike the security guards, he wasn't tied to the narrative. He was a medical professional, a man whose credibility came stamped with authority, a man whose words couldn't be dismissed as easily as bias or distraction. Everyone knew his testimony could end the trial or unravel it completely. The judge announced that the next day would bring final witness testimony, including the doctor. The courtroom buzzed as people filed out, cameras flashing, fans chanting. Outside, the divide was vicious. Some carried posters of Cardi B, chanting her name as though she had already been vindicated. Others held signs calling Ammani brave, demanding justice against celebrity privilege. By sundown, the courthouse steps looked less like a legal venue, and more like a protest ground. Helicopters hovered above, news vans lined the streets, and the tension reached unbearable levels. That night, Los Angeles burned with conversation. Bloggers uploaded thumbnails screaming, "Doctor will save Cardi," or "Final witness will end Cardi." Live streams pulled in millions as people speculated on what he would say. On Twitter, two hashtags surged into a digital battlefield, #DrTruth and #DrPaidOff. For one side, Dr. Fininki would be the man who saved a superstar's career. For the other, he would be the man bribed into protecting fame. The truth was still trapped inside the courthouse, but the world outside had already chosen sides. By morning, the courthouse was so full it seemed the walls themselves would burst. Every seat taken, every hallway lined with bodies, every camera pointed toward the witness stand. When Dr. Fininki finally walked in, calm and steady in his white coat, the entire room shifted. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't theatrical. He was a man who looked like he had no time for games, a man there to end uncertainty. Under oath, his words came precise and surgical. "I was standing less than a foot away from both women," he said. "What I witnessed was a loud verbal exchange, yes. What I did not witness was any physical contact." The gallery froze. Cardi B sat still, her hands folded tightly. Ammani Ellis stiffened, her face pale. Reporters scrambled, their pens scratching furiously. The prosecution tried to shake him, suggesting bias. "She's your patient," they pressed. "Isn't it true? You want to protect her?" But Dr. Fininki didn't blink. "Yes, she was my patient. But I'm not here because she's famous. I'm here because I saw what happened. And what I saw was not an assault." He leaned forward, delivering the killing blow. "If she had been scratched deeply enough to require plastic surgery, I would have seen it. And I saw nothing." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. The jury scribbled notes, their faces blank, but the scales were tipping. First Tiara. Now Dr. Fininki, two neutral witnesses dismantling Ammani's case brick by brick. For the defense, it was gold. For the prosecution, it was disaster. And for the public, it was pure spectacle. Outside, the digital world detonated again. Clips of his words spread across TikTok, spliced into dramatic edits, captioned into memes. Some hailed him as the man who saved Cardi's career. Others mocked him as a puppet of fame. Hashtags surged. Blogs screamed. And by sundown, the trial was no longer about spit or scratches, it was about credibility, perception, and the terrifying question of whether truth even mattered anymore. The final morning of the trial arrived with a heaviness that pressed down on every corner of Beverly Hills. The courthouse, which had become the beating heart of a global spectacle, now stood wrapped in barricades, cameras, and chanting crowds. The sidewalks shook with divided voices. On one side, chants of a "protect Cardi" echoed like war drums, the fans waving posters and blasting her music through portable speakers as if this were a concert instead of a verdict day. On the other side, signs reading "Justice for Ammani" rose like shields, their voices raw. From chanting, their faces twisted with anger at what they saw as a system already leaning in favor of fame. Above, helicopters circled endlessly, their blades chopping the sky like punctuation marks, reminding the city that history was about to be written inside those walls. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every bench was filled, every eye sharp, every whisper swallowed by the tension. The jury filed in, faces unreadable, carrying the weight of testimony that had shaken and reshaped the case at every turn. At the plaintiff's table, Ammani Ellis sat stiff, her jaw locked, her hands trembling, as she gripped the edge of the wood. Across from her, Cardi B was still and composed, her eyes lowered, her nails tapping softly against the table in a rhythm only she could hear. Between them stood a silence so charged it could have sparked lightning. The judge gave the nod, and the prosecution rose first for closing arguments. Their lead attorney knew the road ahead was steep, but his voice thundered anyway, fighting to wring sympathy from every corner of the jury box. He painted Ammani as a woman who had faced down the machinery of celebrity power, who had dared to raise her voice against someone untouchable, only to be mocked, silenced, and attacked online. He replayed the images of humiliation, the memories of insults, the scars she claimed lingered not only on her face but on her dignity. He declared that money and fame had always been weapons to crush the ordinary, and that if this jury turned away from her now, then they were declaring that ordinary women could never stand against giants. "If not you, then who?" he thundered. "If not here, then where? If not now, then when?" His voice cracked as he gestured toward Ammani, who dabbed her eyes with trembling hands. The plea wasn't just legal, it was emotional, begging the jury to see her as more than a plaintiff, to see her as every silenced worker trampled by power. But when the defense rose, the air shifted. Cardi's attorney began softly, so softly. The room leaned forward. His tone wasn't thunder, it was steel disguised as silk. "This case is not about fame," he said quietly. "It is not about music. It is not about who you know Cardi B to be on stage or online. It is about facts." He walked slowly, his words slicing the silence. "The facts are simple, no video, no medical records, no undeniable proof. What we do have are two neutral witnesses, Tiara, the receptionist, and Dr. Fininki, the doctor, both standing just feet away, both telling you the same thing: no spit, no scratching, no assault. What happened was an argument. Heated, emotional, yes, but an argument, nothing more. Then his voice sharpened, rising until it cut like a knife. Do not let a $24 million lie become the truth. Do not allow exaggeration to be rewarded with fortune. You saw it with your own eyes. You heard it with your own ears. This was never an assault. This was an argument blown into theater. He pointed toward the jury, his words now booming, his body trembling with force. If the truth matters, then there is only one verdict. Not guilty. The silence that followed was louder than any applause, louder than any gasp. It was the silence of words landing heavy on the shoulders of 12 strangers who would soon decide everything. The judge read his final instructions, his voice monotone, his expression neutral, but no one was listening closely anymore. Everyone knew the next step. The jury filed out, carrying with them the weight of a superstar's career, a woman's reputation, and the cultural war that had swallowed both. The waiting began. Minutes crawled into hours. Outside, the courthouse steps became a battlefield of chance and chaos, reporters broadcasting live updates every 10 minutes, bloggers speculating on YouTube streams, Twitter melting under the pressure of predictions. Some swore the jury would side with Cardi, convinced the testimonies of Tiara and Dr. Faninki had buried the case. Others warned that sympathy was unpredictable, that juries could be swayed by tears, that sometimes emotion trumped evidence. Inside, the two women waited in different storms. Cardi B sat motionless, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping her lawyer's hand so firmly her knuckles whitened. She knew that her entire legacy, every song, every accolade, every headline could be eclipsed in a single decision. Ammani Ellis, on the other hand, paced restlessly, whispering furiously to her lawyers, her eyes darting toward the doors as though she could will the jury back into the room with the verdict she wanted. As night fell, no decision came. Reporters camped outside, live streams pulled millions of viewers, and Beverly Hills glowed with the heat of speculation. Fans at home debated as though they sat on the jury themselves. Podcasts erupted with commentary. TikTokers reenacted the testimonies for clout. Even late-night hosts cracked jokes about nail length being the most talked-about evidence in America. The trial had spilled beyond the courthouse into culture itself, a story now larger than law. The next afternoon, the jury returned. The courtroom filled to bursting, the air thick enough to choke. Reporters sharpened their pens, cameras flickered on, and silence stretched long enough to make every heartbeat sound like a drum. The foreman carried a folded slip of paper, his face unreadable. The judge asked if they had reached a verdict, and he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The paper was passed, opened, read silently. The pause before the words was agony itself. When the verdict was finally spoken, the courtroom erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, some cursed under their breath. The judge's gavel cracked again and again, but the noise couldn't be contained. Cardi B closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek before her expression hardened into steel. Again. Her lawyers gripped her shoulders, whispering frantically, while fans outside screamed her name like she had just stepped off stage after a victory performance. Ammani Ellis slumped in her chair, her face drained, her lawyers surrounding her in a circle of whispers and panic. For her supporters, the verdict was betrayal. For Cardi's fans, it was vindication. For the culture, it was division. The verdict didn't just decide a lawsuit, it cracked open a cultural wound. Supporters of Cardi B declared the truth had prevailed, that a black woman had stood against lies and manipulation and walked away victorious. Supporters of Ammani raged that the system was rigged, that fame had once again silenced the powerless. On social media, hashtags collided in chaos. Hashtag Cardi cleared trended alongside hashtag Justice denied. Blogs uploaded celebratory thumbnails of Cardi's smiling face, while others screamed betrayal in bold red letters. The digital war was just as vicious as the one fought in court. For Cardi, the moment was both triumph and scar. She left the courthouse flanked by security, her face stoic, her steps deliberate. Cameras caught the tremble in her hands as she waved silently to fans, offering no words, because anything she said would be twisted, clipped, and dissected. For Ammani, the exit was quieter, hidden through a side door, her sunglasses covering eyes swollen from tears. To some, she left as a liar. To others, as a woman silenced by a system that bends toward power. By the time the sun set on Beverly Hills, the courthouse was empty, its steps littered with posters, coffee cups, and the echo of chants that had finally faded into silence. But the story didn't end there. It lived on in headlines, in think pieces, in podcasts, in classrooms, in whispered conversations across dinner tables. It became more than a trial. It became a parable of what happens when truth, fame, and power collide under the harshest spotlight imaginable, and as the world replayed every clip, rehashed every word, re-argued every point, one truth remained undeniable. Justice in the age of celebrity is never clean, never simple, and never final. The gavel had fallen, the verdict had been read, but the battle over perception would rage on for years. Careers had been tested, reputations scarred, and a single decision had been cemented into history, not just as a verdict, but as a cultural moment that defined an era.